To existing members, thank you for coming back. And thanks also ought to be expressed, I think, on behalf of this committee for the past committee's work and achievements, bearing in mind that we have lost a number of long-standing experienced members, including the chairman, who was involved for 30 to 40 years in various capacities, particularly as chairman or portfolio holder, Councillor Trevor Fiddler. So if we can acknowledge our thanks to all of those members and what they contributed to the work at File, it would be nice to start with that. So if you agree, just nod and that's fine. Okay, thank you. Thank you. First of all, we need to start with declarations of interest. So are there any declarations of interest, please? No, moving on. Confirmation of the minutes, please, then, for the 26th of April. Are we all in agreement that they were a correct record? Could you show, please, by raising your hand? Thank you. And could we have the details of any substitute members? Councillor Wilder for Councillor Settle. Thank you very much. Thank you. So we move on to the first item, which is item 4, which is the reserve planning members. And you can see what the recommendation is there. I would like to propose from the chair that we possibly look at 4 members from each group, that we name the members today, and if we can't, we leave vacancies that could be filled at some point in the future. So are we okay with that? And do we have names? We've got names from the leading group in terms of being substitutes, and that is, we have Councillor Andrews, Councillor Wilder and Councillor Morris, with 1 vacancy to be filled at a later date. Do I have names from the non-leading group, please? No. Okay. Could we encourage those? Certainly by the next meeting. That would be great. Thank you. Just to remind everybody that obviously at this point I'll just give you a bit of information. Yep.
In terms of the dates of the names, we are going to be providing some training ahead of the next meeting.
I was going to mention that.
The sooner the better will be the answer to that question, please.
All members of the planning committee are required to be either experienced, which many of you are, or have received the appropriate training. Now, sitting here, we've got some new members that have received appropriate training, but some may not have. So we will be organising an additional training session before the next planning meeting. And when we get that date, we'll circulate it. But it's really important that you have the appropriate training. And if I can make the final point, that experienced members will tell you that training is ongoing. Every time you come to a meeting and you attend a planning meeting and involve yourself in the debate, the reports, the discussions, it's a training exercise as well, because you learn something. And it's a very valuable opportunity, as well as making the appropriate decisions. So thank you for your presence this morning. We've dealt with reserve planning members issue. Are we all in favour of what's being suggested? Yes, put your hands up, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll move on. We'll move on to planning matters. Usually, what happens with planning items, if there are speakers, the officer who's in charge of that particular case will make a very short, brief introduction, presentation, and then we'll ask for the speakers to come up and the vice chair will take care of that. If there are no speakers, there will be a full and comprehensive presentation, and we won't break for the speakers because there won't be any there. So just to make that clear. If we can look at item 1, please, Bonds of Elswick, Bonds Lane, Elswick, and the particular application that is in front of you, which is to vary the condition 2 of planning permission 200363 to allow the substitution of all approved house types with new house types, including associated modifications to the development layout, parking arrangements, and landscaping. So I'm going to hand over now for the full presentation. Welcome, Councillor Ledger. Thank you for coming. We haven't actually formally started, so you can actually take part in the debate. We're about to start now, so excellent timing. Thank you. Hand over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Chairman. For those who haven't met me before, my name's Andrew Stell. I'm the Development Manager at Fylde, and you probably see me presenting the majority of applications, certainly all the ones today, and perhaps at most meetings. This application, not a great start, is it? This application relates to, as the Chairman says, the former site of Bonds Ice Cream in Elswick. So it's generally located with the red circle on the plan there, which is an image of Elswick Village. So you can see it's close to the centre of the village there. The application site is within the defined settlement of the village. It's former ice cream manufacturer. Recently, the site that use has terminated and the site has been cleared. It's got residential properties around it at all sides. And it also has the benefit of planning permission for the erection of 8 dwellings, which was authorised by this committee last year. The application in front of us is what's called a Section 73 application. So that's an application that seeks to vary a condition that was approved previously, which in this case was the plans that were approved, because they're looking to alter the house types and some of the minor details of it. The application is here today because Elswick Parish Council have objected. They're concerned about the loss of business on the site, and they've got some concerns over the design and layout of the dwellings. But notwithstanding that, the officer recommendation is for approval. I note that Councillor Hayes here, so I'll break to assume he wants to speak to the committee. So I'll break in a second. I'll just give you a couple of images to familiarise with the site. So this is the site. There's an aerial in more detail. So this isn't actually the location plan, but it indicates close enough what the site is. It's a linear site, fronts onto Bonds Lane, and you can see the former buildings of the ice cream site here. And then this was the car park area. Dwellings on Bonds Lane on the other side, dwellings on Highbury Gate, back onto it on this side. And then Bonds Lane itself is quite a rural lane that sort of disappears off into the countryside in that direction, with the rest of the village off in this direction. Again, a couple of images. These are images from looking at that's the end of Bonds Lane from the village side. What I was intending to show them here is that you can see the buildings as were last year, and the site's now being cleared. This picture was taken last Saturday. I've had 2 weeks off and I've forgotten how to do these things. You can, thank you.
That's why they call it a cursor.
Yes, I'm cursing you, right. So you can see the buildings that were here that have been demolished, and now the site's been cleared. And these are views across the site as like I say, as it was last week. So you see the site's been cleared of the buildings and sort of readied for development, so to speak, without any actual building work taking place. Second image gives you a little bit of a character of Bonds Lane. You've got trees and hedges and the like, and it disappears off into a rural character as you go further in that direction. The scheme in front of us is that. So we're looking at 8 dwellings fronting onto Bonds Lane, each with its own access points, parking, gardens to the rear, typical layout. And at that point, I will break for speakers.
Yes, I'm going to hand over to the Vice Chair. We'll invite the speaker up, please.
Thank you. I think this will probably be the easiest job I've ever done, Paul. You know this far better than I do, so please come along. Please speak. You know how the microphones work. Yeah. Well, for another councillor, the councillor may come and address the committee for effectively an unlimited period of time. That's not a challenge, Paul. Only a member of the public.
That's put me off, isn't it?
It is. Only a member of the public, we'd invite them to speak for up to 3 minutes. If they get close to that time, we'll give them a gentle reminder. If they carry on, we'll give them a less gentle reminder until they stop. I don't think I really need to say much more than that, do I?
That's fine.
Chairman?
Okay.
Away you go,
Chairman,
sir.
Vice Chairman, I'll be very quick and I'm grateful for you allowing me to speak today. I'm not here to speak against this application. I'm here to talk about what it looks like. The fact is it's already got outline planning permission. So basically all we're looking at is what it's going to look like, although the application now is to go from three bedroom dwellings to 4 bedroom. What I'm asking for though, on behalf of the parish council, is the fact to make 2 of the dwellings, render the dwellings and paint them white. 50%, those of you who know Ellswick will know that 50%, more than 50% of the houses basically in the village are white and rendered, which is obviously the countryside look. And the fact is that Bonds was white. The other 2 main buildings in the village, the Ship and the Boot and Shoe, are also both white. On each side of this development, the buildings are white. So all I'm asking for is just to break up the line of houses by making number 3 and number 6 out of the 8 white, which will then mean that the rest of it will fall into place with the village. And I've got to say, there's been precedent for this because virtually every housing estate that is built in Ellswick over the last 20 years has had some white houses where from the when you look from the main road. We have 3 main roads in Ellswick. It's Ash Road, High Street and Beach Road. And the developments up there, such as Stafford's Close, Orchard Meadows, some of the new Beach Road development and Highbury Gate, have all got some white houses looking off from the main road. So that's all we're asking for, is just to ask for two of the buildings to be rendered white to fit in with the rest of the village. And I say again, 50% of the village houses in the village are white and rendered already. Let's just let it fit in, because as I say, we've got to live with it in Ellswick. I've got to say also, in the planning review that was undertaken prior to the elections, one plea that was made was that the planners should look more to what local people want. And this is a very simple one, very simple request, just to ask for that. We in Ellswick have got to live with it. Please let us have a couple of those buildings white so it all blends in. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that.
Right, thank you, Councillor Hayhurst, for that contribution. So we'll go back to Andrew now for the full presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Got my laser pointer back. So, as I said, this is a Section 73 application, so it's revising the details from what's been previously approved. So I'm going to, in the rest of the next few slides, I'm going to show you what has been approved. So this is the planning permission from last year. So it's 8 dwellings, detached properties, fronting onto Bonds Lane, linear arrangement, driveways individually, gardens at the rear. This is the proposed layout, different architect providing the plans, but very similar in terms of its arrangement on site. If we go back to the approved, looking at the proposed, the dwellings have changed in terms of their sort of style perhaps, but not significantly. These are the street scenes. So bit of poor snipping here, but you can see, picking up Councillor Hayhurst's point, that there are 4 properties on the approved street scene with a rendered gable, 2 in the middle, 1 at each end. The proposal under the current application is for the dwellings all to be brick finish. The designs, as setting aside the materials, the designs are largely the same. Gable fronting, two-storey elements to the side. There's been a slight change in that the integral garages that were previously approved are now being proposed to be a sort of a carport feature, that a drive-through feature. Elements of timber shown on the front elevations to break up the brick, but essentially the properties are largely similar. These are examples of the house type drawings, so you can see again where there was render. Now there are elements of brick, perhaps a different style, but it's an evolution of the previous design rather than something that's a dramatic change from it. Just to give you a bit of context, picking up on points that Councillor Hayes made, there are clearly white rendered properties in the village. The previous buildings on site were white. There are properties on the other side of Bonds Lane, they're all brick. So it's not the case that everything's rendered around there. There are also brick properties around there. But you can see, as Councillor Hayes points out, the property beyond the site on Bonds Lane is that one there. That's obviously a white rendered property further down. So this is sort of the last slide I've got. So this pulls things together. The site's in the settlement. So in settlement areas, residential development is generally supported. The site wasn't an employment allocation, so there was no protection given to the existing retention of the existing business on the site. The site has planning permission for residential development, and obviously it's a similar arrangement of development. So there is that is a fallback position. They can implement that planning permission tomorrow if they wish. So that gives strong arguments in favour of the principle of the development. Looking at the scale, largely the same. Looking at the design, like I said before, it's an evolution of that rather than anything dramatically different. There is a change in the render. I'll come to the render at the end again. One thing that we do have here that is slightly unusual is that we do have an objection from the local highway authority. So it is unusual for us to go against their views. They're a statutory consultee on applications where there are implications for the highway network. So they have specialist highway engineers who look at all the applications and give us comments on them. In this case, they've expressed a concern about the lack of a footway on Bonds Lane as part of the development, and they believe that the driveways will lead to people reversing out onto Bonds Lane and creating sort of congestion and safety issues for pedestrians. I think they're wrong. I think that's over engineering the scheme for the scale of development that's involved and for the scale of activity that takes place on Bonds Lane. I've set out a little bit more detail in the report, but I want to make you aware that we are going against their views, but that is much more the exception than the rule, and it's one that I feel is justified here because of the particular circumstances. If we were to do what they wanted to do, it would mean that the dwellings would need to be pushed back to provide space for the footpath, and it means that the site would be undevelopable. There wouldn't be enough space between the back of the properties and the properties on Highbury Gate. Next slide. So if the properties, to provide a footway on the front, the properties would need to go back at least 2 metres, and you'd end up having an unacceptable proximity between these properties here. So on balance, I feel that we need to overrule the Highway Authority on that basis. There are controls to provide appropriate parking on the site. There's a condition that relates to that. And there is also a condition that introduces some traffic calming to the end junction of Bonds Lane with the wider highway network, which will help pedestrians once they're off Bonds Lane get around the village and will slow traffic through the village also, which can only be a benefit, I imagine. There's no other technical issues, and so the recommendation is to grant planning permission as on the agenda papers. We've not had any late comments or anything like that. But I did want to come back to the point that Councillor Hayhurst raised. The recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to conditions. Condition 3 on the agenda papers, page 15, is a standard condition that we impose, which asks for details of the materials to be used are submitted for agreement prior to works commencing. Now, the plans show entirely brick, and I think that's perhaps appropriate given the brick properties opposite. But if there is a committee vibe is in favour of introducing rendered elements to some of the properties, then I can make sure that when we get an application to discharge that condition, that is taken into account, and we can deal with it that way, if that's the member's wish. But that's a discussion for the committee. So I'll shut up now.
Yeah, I think we've got Councillor Nixon, Councillor Armit, Councillor Pittman, I'm testing my Barrington, Councillor Griffiths, yes, and Councillor Collins. So that's almost most of you then. So in that order, please.
Thank you, Chair.
No.
Is there any reason why the developer would not build the houses if you insisted on some white render on them? Would they sort of spit the dummy out and say, no, we're not building them now?
Yeah, Councillor Nixon queried, for the benefit of the tape, as they say, Councillor Nixon queried whether the developer would spit their dummy out if we would ask them to use render. It's not a discussion I've had with them. They've obviously presented this scheme because that's their preferred scheme, but I would be surprised if putting render to parts of a couple of the properties was likely to be a deal breaker for them.
Okay, thank you.
But that will be something that, like I said, could be dealt with through this future application for the condition.
And the second point, the parking on the first application looked like it had space for 2 cars at the front there. Yeah. But the second one looks like it's only got space for 1 at the front, but yet the bigger houses, which would indicate to me more cars per household.
Yeah.
Possible.
The original, the existing scheme, the approved scheme, as you say, it has 2 parking spaces to each dwelling, and it has an integral garage. If I go back to sorry for flicking through a lot, but you've got, each property has a garage here. Now, garages are unlikely to be used for parking, so effectively each property has 2 parking spaces. The proposed scheme has 1 parking space in front of the drive, and then the drive leads to a carport area, so you've got an area underneath the first floor element with a space underneath. That would be available for parking, so you've got 2 parking spaces. That would be more likely to be used because you'd be able to open the doors into the space to the side of it. You're not likely to be wanting to put your washing machine and stuff in there. So you've got a more controllable 2 parking spaces there. There's also a condition that requires that you've got those 2 spaces. The reason I felt that was acceptable as 2 spaces rather than providing more than 2 spaces is that I'm quite mindful, having been to the site, that the lane is quite rural, and providing a double width driveway across the frontage of the property urbanises it. And I'm quite keen to try and respect the fact that this is the edge of the rural village, and try and get that landscaping into the front of the properties as best we can. If it turns out that there are issues with parking, then there is the opportunity for occupiers to pave over parts of their garden to provide extra spaces. But that's not something I wanted to kind of attract to them from the outset. So I felt that the 2 spaces that are provided is an appropriate sort of compromise, I suppose, in terms of in terms of the parking arrangements.
Okay, I feel that people will, just because the way they are, is use that carport area as an internal living area and then pave the front of the garden just to put the extra car on, to extend the actual living areas. Is that sort of, it says something about it's enforcing to stay as a carport. Can you actually say, yes, you have to keep that as a carport, that's part of the condition of buying the house?
Yeah, condition 11
Yeah.
on the planning permission relates to providing the carports on the parking on the properties, specifically the driveway and the carport being retained for parking.
Right.
So if residents did want to enclose that area and use it as living space, then they would need to apply to the council to discharge that to their condition in respect of their particular
Thank you.
property. So there is that control.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Armit.
Thank you. Just so people are aware, new people, when these come in, which have already got planning permission, we're not discussing whether we can do it or not do it. It's already there. So this is just an alteration to it. So you can't get into the discussion of we all love bonds, we all cyclists, we all went out there. Why didn't we give this ice cream hut 300,000, not another one? But that's all gone. That's all gone. So this is just looking at what we've got and how we're changing it. Just following up on that condition there. So on the parking. We all know that this room sits here over and over again and gives out planning permissions in fantasies for the LCC parking of you'll have half a car per house or no cars per house or 4 flats with no parking, and it causes mayhem. That condition for the carport, is that forever? And is it if they come here and say, I'd now like to change it into a room and it seems a reasonable request and it went to appeal, would they, I know you can't say yes or no, but it's likely they'd probably win that. Bonds Lane is a nightmare in terms of parking. We can expect visitors' cars parked on it. We can expect it to be blocked by parking. What's the enforcement quality to keep that condition in place that they will have a carport for the next 25 years? Question one.
Question one. The condition relates to the property, so it is enforced. It exists moving forward. If occupiers do want to vary that to provide parking in an alternate, if occupiers do want to enclose that space to use it for a different purpose, then they would need to come to the council. They would need to demonstrate that they are providing an alternative location for that parking, because the parking standards would require at least two spaces for each property. Bonds Lane is a narrow rural lane, and planning's about balancing up a series of competing aims. We could provide parking across the entire frontage, but I think that will give a very unattractive outlook, and would perhaps encourage the type of, encourage more parking by having it available.
Follow up on that is then, so if we can tighten condition 3, that the end render on the materials one, I think that was condition 3, that they will render white the ends so that it fits in more with the village look, to go in line with what the recommendations from the review was of listening to the locals. Then if we can make that a condition that we stick to, then I'm happy to move approval.
And then see what others have to say. I think is it Councillor Pittman next? I think it is on my list. Yeah. Did you indicate? I don't think you did. No. Councillor Pittman, then it is.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I fully support the parish council wanting some colour variation. I think too many of these new builds nowadays are basically boring, because there's not even a chimney to vary the appearance of them. But in my view, 3 is better than 2, because there's a lack of uniformity in 2 at either end. I think 3, 1 in the middle would be. Well, to me, anything that gives some individuality to these houses is better than leaving all the same. Too many of these houses are all the same. So I would support 3, not 2, with 1 in the middle. What slightly does concern me in terms of reversing out on the onto Bonds Lane, which obviously they will be doing unless they reverse in, is how high this landscaping, you mentioned landscaping, that there would be. How high is that going to be? And is it going to unsight drivers reversing? Because we all know people do plant the most unsuitable trees, shrubs, etc. And basically, 10 years later, that they are far too high. So I was wondering about some sort of restriction on the height and the width of the landscaping in order to give other residents the benefit of good sighting when they are reversing. I've no complaints about not introducing a footpath. Basically, we've never had a footpath there before, so. But I am concerned about introducing too much landscaping there.
Councillor, I'll bring Andrew back in.
Thank you. Yeah, taking those points in reverse order. Condition 6 on the agenda papers, page 16, is another condition which, in this case, requires details of the soft landscaping scheme for the development. That's a standard condition again, and as part of the discharge of that condition, we would always ensure that any landscaping that is proposed onto the front boundaries is of a depth and species and nature that it won't obscure that visibility. There's obviously plants that you can get that grow to very tall and other plants that you can get that don't. So we would look to keep any landscaping in that sort of critical zone to plants that are below 1 metre in height, whereby you can see over the top of them. You can see on the right hand picture, there is a hedge on part of the frontage which is going to be over 1 metre now. So there's going to be some pruning works that take place to that hedge which is retained. You can see the way that their landscaping scheme is illustratively shown on the layout is that they're showing a sort of a single tree and grass and maybe bits of ornamental planting going in there. That will be fleshed out in this landscaping scheme, and that's where we would make sure that control came into place.
Can I just ask, would there be some variation between them? I mean, too often, some of the landscaping is basically repeated all the way along. In terms of individuality, would there be some attempt to vary what is being put in there? And would we have deciduous, non-deciduous, in order to basically make it a more interesting road to walk down or drive down?
Yeah, I think we're looking at how we would develop it from its construction. We'd look for a native species to be used. Whether there's a great variation in that initially is perhaps going to be debatable, but you have properties that are going to be occupied by people who are going to have their own individual ideas about how they plant out their front garden, and no doubt they will take that on board and do things differently. But we certainly wouldn't be looking for, the same scheme on each property. There would be, a mixture of landscaping when it came in.
So there would be
anyway.
a variety.
There would be variety. Can I come back to the first point that you raised, which followed on from Councillor Armitt's proposition, which followed on from the Parish Council's wishes? As I said earlier, condition 3 gives us the opportunity to approve the materials there's a sentence towards the end of that condition that says such details shall include the type, colour and texture of the materials. One option could be to add on the end of that such details shall include the type, colour and texture of the materials with not less than 2. So to pick up the fact that it could be 2 or it could be 3, 4. So not less than 2 of the dwellings, including an element of render treatment to their front elevation. So that would tick the box, I think, that Councillor Armitt, with his approval, was asking for, so that it's hardwired into the condition that has to be done. And it perhaps addresses the point that Councillor Nixon raised, where she had concerns about whether they might, they might not want to do it. That was the phrase. I was struggling. You could tell.
Well, obviously, we'll come back and see whether there's a seconder as well, which we'd require. But Councillor Armitt, would you be content with what's just been suggested? Thank you. And by the way, little interventions from me are simply because we've got a new planning committee. And I just want to say that some people would say, well, we're talking about detail here, but that's precisely what this is about. Because as Councillor Armitt quite rightly said, the principle of development, the houses being there, that's already been sorted. The loss of a business, that's been sorted. Those decisions have been made. But it is important that these are the detailed decisions that we can perhaps through conditions make a difference to even a small modest development like this. And it's really important. And I think we've got Councillor Farrington next.
Thank you. I'll certainly take it. I've got a couple of points to make, one of which might be shaped by a response to a question, actually. Not knowing Bonds Lane, on the graphics you showed, it looked very narrow to me. So is it a thoroughfare in any way? Because I'm trying to understand the fact that there's an objection from the Highways Agency, if it's actually a busy road or if it's almost separated.
It's very much it is a highway. It is very much a rural lane. It's single track. It serves a couple of properties. I think there's a kennels at this point, and then from memory, I think it goes to a farm track and
It doesn't take you. It's not like a rat run.
It doesn't go anywhere, no. Other than you can see from that image, it loops back, and I think it might be a dog walking circuit and that kind of thing. But it doesn't, it doesn't.
So yeah, it sort of links into my point I'm going to make about the mix. That you say they've changed the application to be 4 beds instead of 3. Now, anyone that's done anything with geodemographics knows that if you add a room onto a house, it changes the potential for an older family to stay there. And what happens there is you get children that grow up and get their cars, and then you end up from having 1 or 2 cars in the household to potentially 3. And that's notwithstanding Tim's point about visitors, etc. So that concerns me slightly on 4-bedroom dwellings, the fact that you've got more of a propensity to a larger volume of vehicles. So yeah, I'd just be a bit nervous about that point. On the rendering, I totally agree with a point made earlier about not having 2. And the reason for that is it looks random. If the mix is 50% generally, and that's an organic process, to just add 2 looks almost as if somebody's gone off piste there rather than actually gone along the protocols that exist currently in the village. So I would say you need either 3 or 4 rendered houses to make that work, or you don't have any at all. 2 would look odd, in my opinion. I know that's an aesthetic judgment and an opinion, but it seems logical to me. So, that's more or less the 2 points I'm making in terms of the parking. If it's not a thoroughfare, then I'm less concerned about the objection and the need for a path, to be honest. So that's it.
Yeah, I take the point about the rendering from the parish council, and I'd like to second Councillor Armitt's suggestion on the rendering. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And could I just encourage members, you know, sometimes it's a bit intimidating, planning meetings in terms of coming forward with thoughts and sometimes we go, is this an appropriate expression of an opinion or whatever? Don't worry about that. Really don't worry. If you've got a thought or a concern or any idea at all, then please come forward with it because, you know, we welcome that. That's what this forum is about.
I don't think that's going to be a problem looking
No,
round here.
no, I don't think so. But
Councillor.
it's always worth sort of making that
Of
point.
course it is.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to agree with Councillor Farrington and Councillor Pittman about the numbers. I think 2 is regimented, 3 is more random. But if the parish council are happy with 2, I'm happy to go with that as well. That's all. Thank you.
It's looking a little bit like not less than 3 by the sound of it, doesn't it?
Well, I was going to... Yes, Chairman. I mean, the suggestion I put to the committee was to add the text in that said not less than 2. I suppose it's a question for Councillor Armitt and Councillor Griffiths as the proposer and the seconder.
Yeah, okay, right, okay. So we've got a seconder as well now, Councillor Griffiths. Yeah, thank you. So we move on to Councillor Dixon, please.
Thanks, Chairman. No, just very quickly, I was going to say, I think this perhaps is the perfect time that, you know, if we had a neighbourhood plan in place there, if Ellswick Parish Council had that, that could be built in. And then we'd have a piece of legislation with the developer to say, you must have at least 3 houses with rendering there, because I don't know where we'd stand without any legislation there, with them perhaps challenging that and saying there's nothing in any of the books that states that we need to do that. You know, if we had a neighbourhood plan in place, then it's there in black and white, and they know that's an obligation they've got to live up to. But no, I support what everyone else has said with the going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. A point well made in terms of neighbourhood plans. Councillor Evans.
Would you mind just bringing the first image up of the first planning application? Back, that's it, okay. So you can see on the initial application that there are 4 properties on there that are rendered. So the architects, along with the developers, saw the benefit of doing so. And I would have thought it wouldn't be unreasonable to ask them to retain what they originally asked for in terms of rendering the 4 properties. And then a supplementary question would be, you say it's a single track road. I take it the point that Kelly made regarding additional cars in a larger family group. Is there any mileage at all in, if you pardon the pun, is there any mileage in putting some kind of traffic restrictions on the lane itself? I mean, you don't usually see double yellows on a country lane, but and it may not be feasible, I don't know, in terms of the area itself, but you don't want somebody sort of coming around and sticking the car on the lane, which will increase the difficulty of people reversing out and sight of pedestrians.
Do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, can do. I think the image here illustrates the point I think a couple of the councillors have made about the symmetry of it, and perhaps having the random approach would be better than that. I've seen nodding coming from the members. The suggestion that's been on the table is for not more than 3 properties. So I think that would allow for 4 or whatever.
Not less than 3.
Not less than 3.
Not less.
Not less than 3. Would allow for 3, 4, 5, whatever. And I think that's perhaps, I think it's been beneficial today to have that discussion, because I think it has picked up on clearly the wishes of the parish council. But also I think it probably would give a better scheme visually in the end result. So I think that has been helpful. So hopefully that first point is already covered. The second point about the parking restrictions is more of a difficult one, in that the council can't, through the planning system, we can't require that parking restrictions are put in place, because there's separate legislation, highway legislation, that deals with that. but in this case, I think it probably will be relatively self-policing because of, which way were the pictures? Because the lane is itself, it is so narrow that if you were to park there, you would be causing an obstruction, and no doubt the farmer would lift you out of the way, or the police would come and sort something out. So that's the, yeah, that's the, that I think that's the, that's where we are on that point, councillor.
we're going to make progress with this now, because we've got a proposer and a seconder, and it is for this change in the condition, isn't it, that we add that not less than 3 have rendered. The other thought I had about this issue about the visual appearance of the house, of course, that it's always incumbent upon individual householder to make changes themselves anyway. And I think I'm right in saying this, they don't require, I don't think, planning permission to change, you know, to do some rendering on the front of their house. So it's not impossible that you could see some variation anyway, with people going, I quite like the rendered one that we've approved, I wouldn't mind that, and you might see that becoming more of a feature than there is now. I mean, I know Elswick quite well, and there is a balance there, there is a mix, and I think committee have rightfully picked up something that is within our remit that can help make this a little bit more attractive and integrated in terms of the Elswick community. So I think we've got a proposer and a seconder. Would you like to read out with the condition as well what we're actually approving, just to make absolutely sure we're all clear?
Yeah, there's a revised, well, the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to a revision of condition 3, which alters the penultimate sentence to say that such details shall include the type, colour and render of the materials, with not less than 3 of the dwellings, including an element of render treatment to the front elevation. There would also be an amendment, because we have a reason for every condition, so there would be a consequential amendment to the reason, which would add in reference to not just the character of surrounding buildings, but make reference to the wider character of the village as a settlement.
And if everybody's content.
Thanks, Chairman, and to the committee. I came for 2 because I thought I might get 2, but to get 3 or more, I'm even delighted.
Yes, I can tell you're ecstatic.
A skilled and experienced negotiator, Councillor Hayhurst.
Okay, well done. Can we move on now to 2 related items, item 2 and then item 3? But can I make it clear that although they're very tightly related, as you can see if you've read the report, we will have to have a separate vote on both issues. So item 2, I think, first.
This is in the presentation, but this is the way the kennels are at the end, and then it becomes a
Right, item 2. Yeah.
Looking at that, I'm reminded of the old Talking Heads song, Road to Nowhere.
yeah. We can say that now, Councillor Hayes gone probably.
Right, item 2 then, which is Homebird St Anne's Limited, the applicant.
I'll get IT to cut that out.
And demolition of existing storage outbuilding within rear yard and installation of solar panels to rear and side roof slopes of building. So we don't have any speakers here. We don't have anybody in the public gallery at the moment. So I still will continue to call you councillor, I think, rather than first names for a little while. I get used to it. Pardon?
And the camera's going.
Yes, okay, that's right. So can we ask Andrew, please, to introduce this particular item?
Okay, thank you. This relates to the public offices, obviously former council building, just out the back there. The building itself is grade 2 listed, and it's also located in the conservation area. If anybody's seen it recently, there's active conversion works taking place to convert it into a homewares property, a retail outlet. This application relates to that planning permission, so things that have arisen during the implementation of it. So there's two elements to it, one of which is to add solar panels to the roof, and the other is to demolish an outbuilding to the rear. Because it's a listed building, they need planning permission for that, but they also need listed building consent, which is separate legislation. There's some appeal decisions later on the agenda, which I'm just going to use as perhaps a little bit of as a sort of a explanation as to the difference between the two, because it's not particularly clear here. The assessments are very similar on this particular application, just because of the nature of them. This application has the support of the Town Council, and it's also recommended for approval by officers. But because the public offices is owned by the council, it needs to come to this committee for a decision. So this is essentially the scheme that we're looking at. This is the, get my pointer, laser pointer up. This is the public office building. This is car park area that you may be familiar with from previous visits there. So the solar panels are proposed for the rear roof slope of the main part of the building, and then the side roof slope of this rear outrigger. And this red cross indicates the building that's to be demolished and has already been demolished.
Andrew, just to sort of, can you immediately indicate where Clifton Drive is?
Clifton
So
Drive
the
is just off,
orientation is
yeah,
clear.
Clifton Drive is, this is the access points to Clifton Drive.
Yeah.
So if you were to go off in that direction, you would be going up Wood Street. You're facing the Marks and Spencers there. So this is the architect's drawings. So these are showing the solar panels to the building as I indicated on the previous aerial. And this is some pictures taken a couple of weeks back in the car park area. So the solar panels, this is the back of the main building. This is the access point onto, that's Wood Street down there. So this is the access, this is the location of the solar panels on here. And then solar panels would also go on this outrigger here. The building to be demolished is over in this corner, which is in this corner. And as you can see, it has been demolished. A couple of street scene pictures. As part of the, this is a picture of how the building looks. So the public office is here in what's called the T&L building here, which is empty and is scheduled to be demolished very soon. It's to be demolished to facilitate the erection of a block of apartments, which is, this is the rendered image of those. The point of showing you that was to indicate that you don't see the solar panels on the front, from the front, because they're on the back of roof slope. You also don't see them on that rear outrigger from the road either, because they are going to be, the gap's too narrow to see through. This is some works that are taking place inside the building. So this is what was the council chamber many years back. For anybody, this just shows that the active works are taking place. So consideration of merits. We need to on the planning legislation, we need to consider whether the works are harmful to the listed building, and then whether that harm is significant or less than, sorry, substantial or less than substantial. And then there's all sorts of technical ways that we weigh that up. But in this case, the assessment is that it's a less than substantial harm. And where there is less substantial harm, we have to consider if there are any public benefits. So the solar panels do lead to harm, but they are sensitively sited. They're not particularly visible from the street, as I've shown you. They will be visible on the outrigger from the car park and some of the flats, but there is a public benefit coming from them, both in terms of the energy costs to the operator, therefore the viability of the business, therefore the use of that premises. But then there's obviously the wider global climate change benefits that come from renewable energy sources. So with regards to the solar panels, feels that the principle is one that's acceptable. I've made reference there to Heritage England guidance on this. There's a document called Energy Efficiency in Historic Buildings, and that looks like that. So this is showing you where they've got solar panels on a grade 1. This is Gloucester Cathedral. So that's solar panels on the roof of a grade 1 listed building. But one of the examples they give of how to do it is exactly what's happening here. So it's solar panels sat between the chimneys. In this case, it's sat between tables as well, away from the ridge, away from the eaves, and sitting comfortably on there. And also being something that's reversible, so that the solar panels can be removed without altering the historic integrity and the fabric of the building. The demolition of the building, oops, gone the wrong way. The demolition of the building, it was just a brick. It was brick and slate, but it was just a single-story outbuilding, store building that was not for any valuable purpose in terms of the redevelopment site. It didn't have any particular value itself, and it was allowing access into the site, unlawful access, and there was vandalism and damage being caused. So the request came in to remove it, which allowed for a more secure fence, perimeter fence to be erected. So following discussions with the applicant, we agreed that they should do that. This application, or these applications, are here to sort of tidy that up, if you will. So principles acceptable, details acceptable. Planning permission looks at external changes to the building and the demolition. The recommendation to committee is to grant planning permission for that. Listed building looks at more narrowly focused on the historic and architectural quality, but would also look at the internal works, whereas planning permission is just external. So in this case, the assessment is the same, and the recommendation is also for approval. There is a slightly different condition to the listed building, because we're looking to get details from the applicant of where they're going to run the cables and what batteries they might have. They haven't come up with a final or settled on a final supplier as yet. So there's a condition to get those details from them and make sure all that's suitable. So both applications are recommended for approval. And I'd ask that we have a separate vote on them.
Yeah. Councillor Dixon.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm happy to propose this. Just because the building is listed and has some heritage value doesn't mean it can't be sustainable. And I really do applaud them for doing this. I think they've done it in the most sensible way possible, and a really responsible way. I'm really pleased to see it. So yeah, fully support it. Oh, and the demolition of the part at the back as well. I don't think there was a blue plaque on it. I don't think we had any royal visits there or anything like that. It really, I went and had a look. It really was an old.
I think apparently it was creating security problems on the site, and there was sort of trespass, people getting in, using that building to get on the roofs, etc. So it's probably a necessary thing to do, actually. But thank you for those comments.
Very happy.
Councillor Wilder.
Years ago, where I live, we had 2 courts built, and we had solar tiles.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ahmed.
A couple of questions, which sometimes just also to help with some of the new people as well. The retrospective thing is something you'll come to live with. It's a horrible thing. It's when they've already done it and then they come and ask permission to it. So I've got 4 points, but just do one by one. If we said, no, we really, really love this, can we force them to rebuild it?
Yes. There are procedures we would need to go through, but if a listed building has been demolished, then there is enforcement powers available to a local authority to require that listed building to be rebuilt.
And second one, just again, just for everybody, when you give listing out to a building, because we had this in Kirkham, I think as well, it includes part of the curtilage. So you could have some horrible 1970s breeze block lump that suddenly gets listed, which obviously nobody likes, but because it's gone through that, we have to go through this process. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, when a building is listed, it's not just the building, it's buildings within its curtilage that are listed as well, which is why, in this case, the public office is the listed building. There was that was a shed that the gardeners used for storing having their brews in and that kind of thing. This was a store room as well, and this is a store room as well. So these were all storage buildings that are listed by virtue of being within the perimeter, the curtilage of the public offices as a listed building, which is why we need listed building consent to demolish it.
And then two actual questions. Solar panels have been around for a long time now, and they are still absolutely pig ugly, mainly, and lumps on a building. Is there any movement you're aware of in your profession of making them more attractive, making them more like tiles, so they look like roof tiles rather than horrible lumps of sheet of glass stuck on a building?
I'm glad you raised that, Councillor Arnott, because it's something that I frequently raise at briefings, and I share the view that often when all the technology is there in terms of these solar panels, we really should be able to produce solar panels that blend into their surroundings far better than they do at the moment. And apparently, I've asked this question, the officers will probably give you this information, but there is progress in that department.
Well, I think Councillor Wilder said that there is technology now available that allows solar tiles to be used in construction, and if we were talking about a modern building, that happens, and they do look much less alien on the roof than perhaps what you imagine a solar panel to look like. Obviously, that's not an option here, because we wouldn't want to see the historic fabric of the building taken off, the slates taken off, and have solar tiles inserted. So the next best thing is to put solar panels on there that are sensitively located and are done in a way that allows them to be removed, and as technology advances, there might be better ones in 10 years' time, and therefore they might need less of them to generate the same power, or however it works. They may be visually better, but from my assessment of having visited and viewed around the building, they don't seem to be cutting costs. So I think they're likely to be using the best available technology at the time when they do plump for a final supplier on this particular job.
My final.
Sorry, just to add to that as well, I think
And my final point is, where did we end up with the old council chamber? Because there's a lot of history and lovely stuff in there. What was the final decision on what happened to that, and what did we save from it?
That is the old council chamber. What they're doing is this used to be the planning office, so my desk used to be about here. So they're open. I haven't got a plan to show you, but this wall was a solid wall with some oak panelling on it. The oak panelling's been taken off and saved. The wall's been taken out so that when you come up these stairs, you enter into that room. The panelling's going to be put around these joists, and then this is going to be one of the showroom elements to the homewares building. Behind me, when I took this picture, is a door that was blocked up. That's now been opened out. So that leads to another room. So the idea of the where they're doing this homewares is it's going to, so it's a bit like an IKEA situation where it flows from one room setup to another room setup. But there are a lot of the wallpapering's been stripped back, and it's kind of obviously a work in progress. But the wooden crests there, the fireplace is there, the doors are there, the stained glass in the doors there, the windows have been repaired, the roof's been repaired. So they're doing all the right things in terms of making that room. Obviously, you can see the timber roof supports for the vaulted ceiling. All that will be no doubt well lit and decorated and things. So I think it will be quite a stunning space when it's all done.
I'd just add a couple of comments that here is a good example of a building that we were slowly but surely losing, that was derelict, vandalism, etc. A listed building with, some sort of presence on the high street, a gateway location for St Anne's, and yet this is an example, and I wish there were more, of repurposing buildings that have lost their previous usage and yet been brought back to life, and many of the original features being enhanced or preserved. And it's a really good example. We all know how the retail sector is suffering in town centres, and we're managing to get a furnishing retailer, Homebird, in using this building, which has effectively saved this building. The other building next to it was different because it wasn't listed, and it's in even worse state. But that space is now will be used by the flats that we've already given planning permission for. Modern design, as you saw, but actually sympathetic to the character with the gables, etc., of that part of St Anne's. So, Councillor Armitt has commented on this. This is something really to be enthusiastic about, and it's something that we should be welcoming, and I wish we could see more of. We've got a proposer in Councillor Dixon, wasn't it? Who was the have we got a second?
Wilder.
Councillor Wilder.
For the planning application.
For the planning application, because we'll now go obviously to the consent, listed building consent. All those in favour? Unanimous, thank you. So we move to item 3.
I have no further presentation on that.
No.
So my question was going to be whether the same proposer and seconder will carry through to the listed building
Okay,
application.
are you happy to do that? Okay, so it's proposed and seconded by the same people. All those in favour? Unanimous.
Again.
Thank you, members.
Yeah, I've made a mistake in this one, so I'll explain it in a second. But I certainly don't normally present the appeal decisions. They are there for information, as the chairman says. When I put the agenda together, they've both got identical descriptions of development, and that's wrong. The second one on the list is actually the application for listed building consent relating to the works that were covered. So the first one was planning permission, the second one was listed building consent, which is essentially what I've just done at public offices, where we've been looking at the same scheme, needed planning permission as needed listed building consent. Here we've had extensions to a flat. We've come to the inspectors looked at it. We've refused consent for both. The inspectors looked at it and allowed one of the appeals for listed building consent, but has dismissed the appeal for planning permission. So I thought it useful just to run through the difference. The planning application is looking at everything. So it's looking at the principle of the development, which in this case was an extension, looking at the design, materials, the impact on the street scene, conservation impacts, the relationship to neighbours, and the parking and all sorts of other things. The listed building consent is much more narrowly focused. It's just looking at the impact on that building and the listed building, and particularly how its architectural and historic character could be affected by the works that were proposed. And again, I mentioned earlier, but a listed building consent looks at internal works as well as external works, because if this was a listed building, the cornices and all that sort of detail will be part of the interest of the listing. So this is the building in question. So it's this property from the front, from the back, much more random. And the proposal was actually to build on top of this part of it. I go to the next slide. So that elevation there had that extra floor put on top of it. So you went from a 2-storey, 1, 2, to being 1, 2, 3. We refused consent on the basis that the addition of that feature was harmful to the listed building. So we refused listed building consent for that. We also refused planning permission because it was harmful to the listed building, it was harmful to the conservation area, and it was harmful to the amenity of the neighbouring occupiers here, because the projection out ensured that their bedroom window here would have been, the outlook from it would have been of this blank gable, because of, it's a little difficult to say from where the pictures are, because this window is actually recessed from where the extension was proposed already. So it was then increasing that. So it meant that that this window would have been within that kind of a tunnel. So the inspector sort of looked at that, came through with a load of conclusions, which I won't run through in detail, but the inspector came to the view that the development would have had an adverse impact on the living conditions of that neighbouring occupier. Therefore, they dismissed the appeal for the planning permission, but he felt that the works would adequately preserve the historic interest of the listed building, and therefore he allowed that appeal. So the neighbours who were affected by this rang me up after the decision, and does this mean they can do it? It doesn't. They needed to have 2 wins, not 1 win, and they haven't. The inspector's view was that whilst that work would have led to harm to the listed building, it wasn't so harmful that it led to refusal, but the harm on the neighbouring amenity was such that planning permission couldn't be supported, so he dismissed that appeal. And, well, if they were to submit something that was perhaps less harmful to the neighbouring amenity, then it gives them a pointer that doing something there might be okay, but you need to address the comments that the inspectors made here about amenity. He talks about the loss of outlook, he talks about the tunnel effect, he talks about loss of daylight, and there's all sorts of technical assessments about the amount of sunlight lost and all that kind of stuff. So it perhaps gives them a direction of travel in terms of modifying the scheme if that's possible and achievable and affordable to do. But it means that if we were to get another application, we wouldn't be looking to refuse the listed building element because the inspector's given us a steer there, and we would just be, if we were to refuse something, having had an inspector's decision go against us, we would then be unreasonable, and that would open us up to costs claims. But I doubt that there is a realistic way forward for them in this case, but in other cases there often can be, and you can find that after an appeal has been dismissed, the applicant will pore over the wording of the inspector's letter and find holes in it to try and come up with a plan B of their scheme. So I just thought that was a useful, given what we've had with the public officers, I thought it was perhaps useful just to spend 5 minutes running that through with you.
Before we close the meeting, there's just one other matter. At the planning session, which some of you were present, I put forward a view regarding a view that I've had for some time regarding the starting time for planning meetings. I've always felt that 10 o'clock loses a significant part of the morning, and that it would be more effective in terms of how we operate, and hopefully not too inconvenient for people who are contributing to it, i.e. members and officers, that we bring forward that 10 o'clock to 9:30 start. The people at the planning session the consensus was, and I made it quite clear that this is something obviously that I'm raising at this stage as a possibility rather than a specific decision. But I would like to ask the committee whether they would support this, because I do feel, particularly for people who are working, who have time off, that, you know, they're losing a section of the morning that they could be, you know, concentrating on planning issues. I am told, I'll come to you, Councillor Ahmed, in a second. I am told as well that we've looked at the legal background here, and there is no necessity to take this to full council. However, it would be appropriate to take it to the chief exec and, you know, get his views and whether he's comfortable with that, etc. And that's what I'm looking for support from the committee to do. But I would like your views, which is why I'm asking now. Councillor Ahmed.
So in the discussions, did you at all consider in the evening? I mean, most, if you look around most councils around the UK, an awful lot have planning in the evening. It makes it sharper because you want to get home. Also, this is one of the only committees that doesn't meet in the evening. And as you did mention, for a lot of us, and the council has changed its dynamic, there's a lot more people with jobs now. It would be better if we looked at the evening potentially.
I think that's a much bigger decision, but I take note of that, Councillor Ahmed, and put it forward in the correct forums. But thank you for that. Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. In a way, it's to back up what Councillor Ahmed was saying. We had the Planning Advisory Service review last year, and one point I made was that when planning applications, when parish councils and town councils are notified of planning applications and they pass their comments, there's no officer report available. So they might object to a scheme, but by the time, because of their objection, it comes before this committee. But by the time it doesn't come before the committee, perhaps the parish councils or the town councils' objections have been addressed, and there wouldn't be a need for it to come before the committee. Now, the application we had earlier, Bonds of Ellswick, is perhaps an example where perhaps if there'd been more dialogue between the parish council and officers and the developer, there wouldn't have been a need for that item to be on the agenda today. There wouldn't have been the need for an officer's report and less officers' time spent on it. So the agenda today could have just been 2 items, not 3. And an agenda that short could quite easily be addressed, discussed in an evening meeting.
I hear both arguments, and obviously that's a view that, in particular, both of you actually share. I'm not sure that that's widely held, but we take note of those comments. We've heard that before, Councillor Collins, of, you know, people that have made that, you know, that pitch, if you like, for moving it from daytime to evening activity, and the advantages that have. If you do that, there are counter arguments as well, which people will make in terms of their availability and the way that they work. So there is not an easy fix on that. But
Goodbye, Chair. regardless of it, if the meeting was held during the day or in the evening, I think we find items on the agenda that don't necessarily need to be on the agenda, and the agendas could be smaller. So it's not.
I'm going to bring one or two other people in just to, because
Can I
you've
just
made
address
them
that for one
points.
second,
Bring the
Chairman?
vice chair in and I'll be
Yeah,
back.
Councillor Collins, I see this from the St Anne's Town Council point of view as well. And what we try to do, and something that I will encourage from both sides of the table, is that there is a more iterative process whereby if town council or any parish council have an objection or any comment requiring clarification, that's done in communication, and hopefully over time this will lead to a change in culture. It will lead to less of these things like the one we spoke of earlier coming forward. So rest assured that will be the case.
I'll bring Mark in as well, if that's
Councillor
okay.
Dixon.
Yeah,
Councillor-
just to say, Chairman, the other issue is, in terms of the Planning Advisory Service review, one of the things there was to look at the scheme of delegation. So that is something that we will be looking at and how we manage that as part of the action plan. I've just drafted a report to the Internal Affairs Scrutiny Committee.
Dixon, I think.
Yeah, Chair, I'm more than happy to start meetings earlier. I will actually argue the counter that's been mentioned about having these meetings at night. I think I've got a full-time job. I take time out of that job to come to these, and I'm happy to do that. I don't want to do a full-time job, then come to a planning meeting, which could go on for 4 or 5 hours sometimes at night. I think you won't get the best out of us in that situation, and it puts other pressures on life as well. So I would rather have it this way round than earlier in the day. But that's my personal situation.
But we're happy to take different views, and this is the forum, so thank you for expressing those. There'll always be divided opinions in terms of, and there is an element of sort of, how does it suit my particular situation as well, ideally. But the points have been noted, but also the issue regarding delegation and the business of looking at various items on the agenda. That's going to be something, as Mark said, will be dealt with under the Planning Advisory Service review. But I think I'm content in saying that you're happy for me to take this forward, the 9:30, that would make more effective use of a whole morning session. So unless anybody
Councillor Wilder wanted to speak.
Yeah, I don't think we need a vote on this, do we? No, okay. Yeah, go on.
Chair, it's just that we've got an internal scrutiny tonight, a learning one.
Yes,
I
we
just
have.
wondered if it's going to be in there, that was going to say.
Yeah, well, I'm there as well, so. Okay. But I'm glad you take the view that this could be a step forward. So we'll certainly, if we, from legal advice, if we just communicate this via the minute through to.
Yes,
the
that
chief
would be
exec,
sufficient, and
is
we'll
that-
obviously liaise with Mr Oldfield
Yes, okay.
and take his view, and then obviously if it's an issue we can come back and
Yes.
can let everybody know.
But it may be possible that the next meeting could start at 9:30.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So bear that in mind. I'm just appreciative of one or two coming quite early this morning, thinking it might have been 9:30 today, but hopefully for the next meeting it will. Could I thank members very much for this first new planning committee meeting that were present members, and for your contributions. And there have been some excellent debates this morning over these particular issues. So thank you very much for your commitment. Thank you. And our officers as well. Thank you very much. Okay.
Orange Club biscuits in there, marvellous.
Oh, right. Okay. Very good. Yeah. Well, we seek to please. There we are. I prefer tangerine biscuits myself, but never mind. There we go.